I've been in fires in the past that have run through larger cities, and you'll see entire blocks that are completely burned to the ground, yet there's one house in the middle of the block that's still standing. And fire is very unpredictable, but you want to try to set your house up for the best chance of survivability. And that comes in preparedness. You have to get ready in advance for these types of situations.
Here at Liberty and Finance, we're licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. We are standing by the inventory, ready to make sure you get what you need, even into the wee hours of night and on weekends, because preparedness doesn't stop. Call us 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and with us today a new guest. He is a firefighter and emergency medical technician in a large metropolitan city here in the Southwest. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for having me today.
Yeah, and the reason we wanted to have you on today was our channel was originally called Reluctant Preppers. So we really have a focus on prepping for a worst case scenario. I guess if we could start out on the topic of how does being a firefighter, an emergency medical technician, how does that give you the mindset of preparedness?
That's a great question. In the fire service, what we do is being prepared. So 90% of what we do is we're prepared to respond. 10% of what we actually do is responding to calls for service. In the fire service, what we do is through preparation, we're at the fire station, and anybody who has in their area a staffed fire service know that there are firefighters in a fire station waiting to respond out to emergencies. So in relation to preparedness, you have to be prepared to leave at a moment's notice. If the firefighters are eating dinner, they get a call for service, they have to get up and go. Mm-hmm. Their equipment is ready, it's on the truck, they're trained, they have knowledge, they have experience. And that's very closely related to preparedness, is preparing yourself for an event or an emergency, and you know exactly what to do. In the fire service, through training and experience, it sets us up for any situation we may encounter.
In the past couple of years, people have become aware of unprecedented situations in the world. Obviously, we had the COVID-19 pandemic, which made people aware of preparedness, and now they're looking to move out of the cities in some circumstances. There was fires in California last year, quite big ones that we hadn't seen for a long time. In New Mexico recently, there's been fires. Your perspective on what are some things that people might want to consider when it comes to preparedness, I guess, for their home right now. If they do live in the Southwest, what are some preparedness steps that people should keep in mind when making their home maybe fireproof or at least fire resistant?
That's a great question. So there are certain steps that we can do to prepare our homes. And in regards to fire season, and if you live in rural areas or areas that may be subject to wildland fires, you want to try to fireproof your house. Now, nothing is ever truly fire resistant, but you want to make it least likely to catch on fire. So that means if you burn firewood, a lot of times people will stack up firewood next to their house for convenience in the wintertime. And sometimes that firewood will sit there during the summertime. So what you want to try to do is remove as many combustibles away from the house as possible. Move that firewood to a different location that's further away from your house. You want to try to protect your property. You want to give your property the best chance to survive a fire should a fire be in your vicinity. A lot of times it's nice that we live in areas that we have trees that are extremely close to our house, especially trees that the limbs are in close proximity to the ground. What we need to do is try to rake up any dead leaves, pine needles, things of that sort. Keep your gutters clear of dead and dry leaves. See if there's any trees that are actually touching the house. You want to try to limb those branches that are coming in contact with your house and reduce the amount of fuels that are next to your house. You want to give your house some type of defensible space. A space that you know that if there's a fire in the area, your house has a better chance of surviving a catastrophic type fire. Now, fires are unpredictable. I've been in fires in the past that have run through larger cities, and you'll see entire blocks that are completely burned to the ground, yet there's one house in the middle of the block that's still standing. And fire is very unpredictable, but you want to try to set your house up for the best chance of survivability. And that comes in preparedness. You have to get ready in advance for these types of situations. Because if you wait to the last minute, you're going to get caught off guard. Circumstances, they're not always ideal. In regards to preparedness, is do things in advance. Have a plan in advance. Do you have a means of securing some of your most valuable personal belongings? Pictures, heirlooms, keepsakes. What are you going to do if you have to evacuate your house? Ideally, you should have a plan. What are you willing to write off in your house? What's valuable to you? Of course, it's in the fire service, we value life as our highest priority. Life, property, the environment. But we have to make those decisions for ourselves is, okay, I need to make sure that my family and I are out of the house. We have our loved ones, we have our pictures, memories, whatever. Anything else can be replaced. There's certain things that have more significant value that cannot be replaced. So you kind of have to make a decision, have a plan in place is worst case scenario, best case scenario. What are we going to do? And part of that is setting yourself up in advance. Kind of in the fire service, firefighters, they go through months and months of training. And that's just the basic fundamental training to prepare to do the job. There's advanced training that people can do in regards to hazmat operations, wildland, technical rescue, but we have to continue to be able to respond to these types of emergencies.
Obviously, being a firefighter and an emergency medical technician, that already gives you the mind of someone who is prepared, right? And you've taken that not only to fortify your house against fires, but also fortify your house and your family against other sort of disasters that could happen. So could you share with our viewers, I guess, some of the ways that you have prepared yourself and your family for maybe a worst case scenario, not only when it comes to wildfires possibly, but also just financial disasters or food shortages? I mean, we're already hearing about the possibility of that. Your perspective on that, when it comes to worst case scenarios, how have you taken action?
Absolutely. And being a firefighter, I've been a firefighter for over 24 years. And that does bleed over into the home life, the way that we operate and function on a daily basis. In the fire service, we always have to be prepared to respond. That means that our trucks are always topped off with fuel. Our equipment is ready to go. And for us in the fire service, for example, if our fire apparatus is below 3/4 of a tank, we keep that, we go and fill up. If we consider anything at half a tank of fuel is considered an empty truck, because we may get called out to an emergency where we're there for an extended period of time. And if we have to pump for the fire truck set up for hours and hours, if the truck's not properly fueled, there's potential that truck will run out of fuel on an emergency. And that's unacceptable to have firefighters show up to an emergency and have their truck run out of fuel. And so what we do at our house typically is we try not to let our vehicles go below half a tank of fuel. We talked about wildland fires. What if you have to evacuate your house? And if there's a significant emergency in your area, what kind of access, you have to think about what kind of access are you going to have to fuel? If you have to go fill up your car to leave the vicinity, to drive 1 hour, 2 hours away, are you going to have to wait in line at the fuel pump? Or can you just get in your car and drive to where you need to be? So you want to keep that in mind. Also, we're looking at food shortages. So we always have to be prepared for our families, and keep in mind that for myself, we have a moderate sized family. But being that we've had a moderate sized family, we've always bought things in bulk. And I'm not saying to go out and hoard things and hoard toilet paper like what was going on earlier, or hoard ground beef or things like that. But you need to have enough to sustain yourself for a few months. And not only being a firefighter, but when it comes to this spiritually wise, and as a practicing Catholic, one thing that comes to mind for myself is during the time of the exile from Egypt. You know, the Israelites were told to be prepared to leave. They had to, during the time of Passover, they had to eat the Passover meal with their shoes on their sandals on their feet and their belts girded, and they had to be prepared to leave. And so for us, I kind of take that same approach as we have to be prepared to leave. Not only leave our material possessions behind, but you have to prepare yourself spiritually to make sure that you're prepared to encounter what life has to bring after this material life. And so we talked about preparing for food, making sure you have extra food, have a plan. So in the fire service, we try to teach people about have a fire escape plan in your house. If there's a fire in our house, we're going to all meet outside in the front of the house to make sure everybody's out. And you can take that same approach that if we have a fire in our house, we're going to get out here. If there's a wildfire in our area threatening our house, we need to go somewhere else. If there's some type of emergency that threatens us, whether it's a natural disaster, some other type of disaster, where do we need to go to be in the safest place possible? How long is it going to take us there? If there's a food shortage, do we have enough food to maintain for a few months? Dry goods, canned goods. What's your plan? If there's a food shortage and you can't get food and you have quite a few mouths to feed, what are you going to do? Things have to change. You can't continue to eat X amount of food or live the same lifestyle that you were living prior to this shortage and emergency. Then you kind of have to start thinking about, do I need to start rationing food? Do we have plenty of water? How long can we get through this emergency? How long can we make it?
When people are just starting out, getting into preparedness, it might be kind of intimidating to be like, okay, we need to do all these things. If you could maybe point out maybe 2 or 3 things that people can do to get started to be more prepared, what would those be?
Well, first and foremost, when it comes to keeping your house safe in regards to fires, is clean up a little bit on the outside. Remove some of those combustibles, things that could potentially ignite and spread fire to your house. So let's start on the outside of the house. Let's remove some of those combustibles. Let's cut back any trees that if they catch fire, perform an assessment of your property. Take a step back and look and say, if there was a fire to come through this area, what could potentially catch my house on fire? And try to reduce that. And as we move on to the inside of our house, it's what can we do to make sure our house is going to be secure against fire on the inside? What can we do to mitigate against emergencies, shortage of food? Well, take an account of what's in the cupboard. Do you have a pound of rice or do you have 5 pounds of rice, 10 pounds of rice? What do you need? Take an account first of what you need, what you think you may need to sustain yourself for at least a couple of months. Because a lot of times people make promises, and we see right now that there's a shortage of baby formula. And if they had 1 can on hand, what are they going to do when they go to the store? They need to feed the baby and they need to have an alternative. They can't get baby formula, so have an alternative. Do you have pets? You have 1 bag of dog food. How many pets do you have? How much are you going to need to feed your pets? That's something that comes into consideration. We would like to try to keep all of our family intact, even our pets. So we have to take an account of first what we need and then seeing which you can fit into your finances and your budget. Dry goods, they're not expensive. You can get beans and rice. The price is up right now, but in the summertime you can get them relatively cheap. Add a couple of things to your cupboard. Think about recipes. So if we're out of electricity, what are we going to do? How are we going to, charge cell phones? How are we going to get news? How are we going to signal for help if we need to? Take things like that into consideration. But you have to be able to provide water for your family and food.
And I think one of the things that came to mind there is you said, it's good to have a couple months preparedness. And so if you give yourself a few months or a year, as you're mentioning, then if the system does go down, then you'll have that amount of time to figure out, okay, where am I going to get the food from there? But it definitely gives you time instead of just having, a week or 2 of food, then you don't have too much time to really think about, well, where is my next meal coming from after that?
Exactly. And if you're short on time, you feel hard pressed, you're unprepared. We're talking about preparedness. You have to be prepared. You have to anticipate circumstances. And one thing I didn't quite talk about or mention is the financial system. How are you going to purchase food if everything goes down? Do you have extra cash on hand? Can you barter with something? Do you have the ability to grow vegetables in a garden? To make some kind of produce on your property that you can help sustain yourself? Do you have apple trees, peach trees, any kind of fruit trees in your property? Especially when it comes time to harvest the fruit, an option is to can it. So you need to look at, is it worth your while to maybe garden? There's certain vegetables that you can grow that'll last a few months. Spaghetti squash, some type of food to feed your family. How are you going to acquire the fuel that you need? And we know now that a lot of the fuel is made with, it's ethanol based, has corn in it, it goes bad. You can buy ethanol-free fuel at some stores. They do also sell fuel at some of your local home goods stores, home repair stores. It'll last for a couple of years. Are you using two vehicles? Is it incumbent to use a car that gets 15 miles to the gallon or use a car that gets 40 miles to the gallon? Do you want to save that for a long trip in case you have to pack up and leave?
And when it comes to having community, I think that's so important to, in one, realize that if the system does go down, you have friends and family to support you. But then also, if they aren't prepared, then you can help support them as well in those times. How have you been thinking about community and possibly supporting others or having them support you if the system does go down?
That's a great question. So in the fire service, we're there to support the community. But we also rely on the community support. And taking that approach and aspect into a family life is, we talked about, having a little extra food. Because we saw this about a year and a half ago, that dry goods, they were hard to come by. And we see people that were unprepared. So if I go out, and again, like I was telling you earlier, we would typically buy food in bulk because we have a decent sized family. So the thing for us is to know that if I have family members, neighbors, maybe they weren't quite prepared. They didn't have an opportunity, whatever the case is, to have some food, and now they're short food. Well, if I have a little extra food, I can give some to my neighbor. I can help out my neighbor. Here's some beans, here's some rice, here's some dry goods. Do we have, water, enough water to get us through a day or two? If there's potential that, you see rolling blackouts in California during the summertime. And this is just not related to any type of pandemic, but they do that because the system is overloaded for electric users. So something to consider is, well, if you lose power, is the well stations, are they going to continue to pump water? Do you have enough water in case you lose the water stations lose water for an extended amount of time? Do you have enough water to get you through a few days? Do you have enough water to cook? You have to prioritize what you need to do and look for the support of your community. Talk to your neighbors. Do any of your neighbors have medical needs that maybe you have a neighbor who doesn't have any water and they need to take their medications? We want to try to keep the emergency services as free as possible to be able to respond to those major emergencies.
Over the last couple of years, as we've seen, shutdowns across the country and around the world, and now we're seeing some food shortages develop. Are you thinking more about preparedness now than you were a couple of years ago?
I am. It's more obvious right now, and that we need to be more prepared now than before. Especially in the United States of America, we've been so blessed to have an abundance of everything when it comes to food and the luxury of being able to go to a store and to get whatever you need, whenever you need, and buy in smaller amounts. And you see people's lifestyles changing right now. That you want to go to the store, well, they don't have what you need on the shelf. When are they going to get it? And you have to balance that mentality of making sure you're prepared and hoarding everything and storing everything up for yourself. And one thing that comes to mind is a parable in scripture. There's a gentleman who's well off and he wants to knock down his storage facilities and build bigger ones to store all of these goods that he's acquired for himself. And in scripture, and I'm just paraphrasing, it says, "You fool, tonight your life will be demanded of you." And again, we talked a little bit about being spiritually prepared also. So we could have years and years worth of food and fuel and water stored up to last us through significant events. But if you're not prepared spiritually, everything that you've stored up is meaningless.
And can you share with us how you view that? Because I know faith is the central part of your life, as I try to make it as well. How do you prepare yourself spiritually? Because again, that's the most important thing in preparedness, because everything else comes secondary to that.
The approach that I take is to prepare myself spiritually is first and foremost is we have to have a relationship with the Lord. We're not called just to know what God is, but who God is, and to have a personal relationship. We have to be reconciled to the Lord. If we look in scripture, something that we say is when we see what Jesus said is he came to do the will of his Father. And he calls us to do the will of his Father. So to be in right relationship means to live by the commandments, is to live in right relationship with God. First and foremost, we have to have a relationship with God. Because if we don't have a relationship with God, it's going to be difficult to have a relationship with anybody else. And we have to be reconciled with God. That means that we have to accept all that is before us. Whether we agree, like it, or don't like it, we have to accept the will. If we look in prayer, we see the Our Father prayer. The prayer states, it's thy will be done. It's not my will. So God has a better plan for us. And sometimes we think we have a better plan, but ultimately we just see through a vision of like tunnel vision. We don't see the entire big picture. What's a benefit for us? And we have to remember being prepared spiritually means that we have to be prepared to leave this life at any moment. And looking from the standpoint of faith is, we're called to be in this world, but not of this world. And it's nice to have nice things and to be comfortable, but ultimately these mean nothing if you lose all that for eternity. And we talk about preparedness. We also see parables in scripture, and I'm just paraphrasing, is we talk about the virgins who are awaiting the bridegroom to come. The bridegroom is Jesus. The church is his bride. And we see some of the brides they have their lanterns and their oil, and they're prepared. We talked a little bit earlier about the Passover. They're ready to leave at a moment's notice. That's a reminder for us to be ready to leave this earth at a moment's notice. What happens when the brides, they see they don't have oil? What do? Give us some of your oil. Well, some of the brides were prepared. Well, they said, I don't have enough for you. Go out and get your oil. They go out to get their own oil, and here comes the bridegroom. And he leaves with those who are prepared. And the ones who don't have the oil, they miss out. So the most important aspect for me and for our family is to make sure that we're spiritually prepared. No matter what we encounter in this earthly life, to know that we should be ready to go to meet our Creator and stand before judgment.
Definitely. And we talked about how your role as a firefighter and an emergency medical technician really put you in the mindset of preparedness. Now, when it comes to being a father and husband, you have a responsibility, towards your family when it comes to preparedness spiritually and physically. So how does that influence, if you don't mind speaking about that, like your mindset on preparedness? Yeah.
So as a father, as the man of the household, I'm called to provide for my family. It's my responsibility to put good food in their mouth, to give them sustenance, to help them grow, not only physically, but spiritually. I'm called to help them along this faith journey that we're all along. We're all called to help each other along our faith journey. And I take it's my responsibility. It's nobody else's responsibility. It's not the church's responsibility. It's not a priest's responsibility. It's first and foremost, it's my responsibility. And if I'm lacking in any aspect, I can't put my family in the best position to have a successful life, a successful spiritual life, if I myself am drowning in the water. If I'm looking for somebody to save me, I can't help those who are in need. And in the fire service, we're going to make every effort to get people out of a burning building. But if I happen to go down in the middle of a fire looking for somebody, and we know there's somebody in there, because I'm not prepared, because I wasn't diligent, my equipment wasn't squared away, well, I'm now taking resources away from the person who's in need, because now my fellow firefighters are going to try to rescue me. So I want to make sure that my family's prepared, that we have food, is to help guide them in the spiritual life, to be an example, to be a role model, and to help hopefully teach them.
Are there any last thoughts you'd like to leave with our viewers regarding preparedness? Make
an assessment. So you want to make an assessment of the different types of emergencies you may encounter. Make an assessment of your house. What can you do to prevent any types of emergencies from negatively impacting your house? Take an assessment of your life. What means the most to you? Something that we do is, or should be doing often, is making an examination of conscience. So we need to make account for what have I done, making sure that we're reconciled, not only with the physical aspect, but the spiritual aspect. Like I was talking about earlier, is we can be prepared materially, but not spiritually. And ultimately, that's what means the most. The only thing that's guaranteed is death and taxes. So pay your taxes. And what are you doing to prepare yourself for death? Because death can come in a moment's notice. We can be talking about acquiring fuel or baby formula or food 3 months down the road. I could get in my car and in 5 minutes, get on the road and die in a car accident. And it could happen to anybody. And the question is to ask yourself are you prepared?
All right. Well, thank you so much. You've said it yourself that you're an ordinary person put in extraordinary circumstances. We really appreciate your time today, your wisdom, and also your service, obviously, as a firefighter. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we will let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be double boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Elijah, my brother Kaiser, or my father Dunnigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.